Hi, my name is Fernando Trias, and this is my long 15-minute video trying to explain my plan and my project to identify tree species based on leaf images. Broadleaf trees can be often identified based on just the shape of the leaf, the patterns within it, of the veins, and so forth and so on. Not always. Sometimes trees have the same shape leaf and they can only be identified by the trunk and color, but most of them you can sort of make a good guess just looking at the leaf. In the examples you see above, you can see that a lot of the shapes are quite different and strange, but some of the shapes are very similar, especially the oval and the sort of heart-shaped leaves. They can only really be distinguished by sometimes the ridges on the edges or just how oval they are. And so it was very important when looking at these leaves to kind of preserve a lot of these features and not to kind of take them away. So I wanted to see if I could create a convolutional neural network or something like that that could identify leaves better than existing systems, which generally now deploy sort of computer vision to identify, how many points are there, how much is covered, what are the angles there of the different types. So I thought, well, maybe a convolutional neural network, which does sort of a lot of these things internally, might work better. My data set comes from LeafSnap, which is a collaboration of various universities and the Smithsonian Institution. It covers mostly northeastern trees. I pared it down further to only cover broadleaf trees, so took out pine trees, spruces, firs, anything like that that doesn't actually have leaves. It's left me about 334 megabytes to work with. I used Amazon Linux P2 extra large instances, Keras, TensorFlow, OpenCV, all the sort of tools we've used in our class to sort of try to build a neural network that then can identify the leaves. So this, pairing it down to broadleaf trees, gave me 159 species to work with and about 26,000 images, which isn't much. It turns out that the color isn't really that important. Live, yes, the different shades of green can help you, but on pictures, it's almost very difficult to distinguish. A resolution had to be discovered that was sort of good enough to kind of provide all the edges and ridges and veining patterns, but not so big that it would just be completely unworkable. So I stuck with the 224 images that we've used in the past. And I also added augmentation just because the number of images is so small. And also the leaves can be rotated any which way. That was a very important augmentation to sort of rotate the image and train it with rotations. To give you an example of the complexity of this task, let's look at these different trees. All the leaves on top are all different trees. You can see that the oblong ones are just almost the same, but the angles of the leaves and the density, the angles of the veins, I should say, and the density of the veins is different in each one. Also, some of them have a little twist and a little curl that is not present in others. One of the other challenges was resizing the leaf to a common shape. Now, normally in the cats and dogs databases and all that, the image is just resized without regard to the aspect ratio. They're squished and turned, and that's fine because you've got a lot of other features to look at. But in our case, doing that would misidentify the leaf. Like a leaf at the bottom here on the left is the correct leaf, but if I were to just resize it without regard to the aspect ratio, it would look like a different leaf from a different tree. So when I resized it, I had to make sure to maintain the aspect ratio and just fill in with the background color to kind of do proper training. It also turns out that the color of the leaf, although it is different slightly for every tree, it wasn't well represented in the images that we had to work with. Some of them were dark and anyway, different shades of green were difficult to distinguish. So I decided to go with just look at black and white images to try to get the patterns. In earlier tests, I also pre-processed the images further to extend the contrast and also to perhaps highlight edges. I used some open vision libraries to do contour finding and edge finding and things like that. But I didn't find that that really made much of a difference in the end. Basically just converting to black and white to reduce the complexity and increase the speed was good enough. To give you an indication of the results of all these processing stuff, here are four images of leaves that have been processed. Some of the original images also had color bars and stripes for reference. I took those out because they weren't consistent or really very useful, or I blacked them out. You can see them in the upper left and lower right. The images preserve a lot of detail when they are zoomed in. They are 224 by 224, black and white, grayscale actually. I split the data into three non-overlapping groups, basically training, validation, and testing. The training is used for the training itself, validation at every epoch to validate the model, and testing is reserved for the very end to sort of compare the two models together and see if we can gather some results. Some of the other papers I looked at did not include a testing set. I mainly looked at the validation. I thought it was very important to kind of have something that wasn't used at all in the training, just because the distinctions are so subtle that overfitting for both the training and perhaps even the validation, because the validation is used to sort of move the training along, might be avoided if we have a separate testing set. In addition, I had planned to go out and get images from trees around Harvard and the neighborhood and so forth. But unfortunately, the timing did not work out as the leaves were not really out on the trees and the juvenile leaves are a little different. So I wasn't really able to collect my own testing data that I wanted to collect. I think I will do that now that the leaves are out, but unfortunately I just didn't have the time when I was working on collecting the data. I tried a number of models, including ResNet 50 and Inception, and settled on MobileNet and a convolutional model to sort of compare the two together. MobileNet is supported by TensorFlow Lite and also the Apple's Core ML. So my eventual plan is maybe to create an app if this works well. So the MobileNet model is pretty important. The training on the MobileNet model went significantly faster than the three-layer convolutional model that I had created, 2.5 hours versus 16.5. As well, the MobileNet model converged and sort of gave me much higher accuracy, although the validation was a bit more unstable. In the end, I got pretty much 0.98 accuracy. I got very high accuracy, which we'll show you in the next slide. I used the SGD optimizer instead of Atom or something else because I had read that it sort of provided better tracking and better convergence, and I figured that being that the images are so similar that convergence would be an issue. It turns out it wasn't really that much of an issue, so I think probably a different optimizer would have worked just as well, but SGD worked perfectly fine, so I see no reason to change it. The learning rate of 0.01 was determined after some experimentation. I tried 0.001, which slowed the training and didn't really yield much more significant results. 0.1 was a bit too high. I thought this was a little bit more stable. And I used the recommended momentum and decay, basically, that I had read about in the various guides for how to run this. I think one of the reasons it took so much longer in the convolutional network was the regulation that I put at every single layer. It was probably a bit excessive. I think that could be simplified, and I think it would run a bit faster. I think adding more layers would probably add to the accuracy, and perhaps it's possible to make it as good as the MobileNet. But for my purposes, the MobileNet is superior anyway because it's supported by the mobile platforms that I'm targeting. When comparing the two models, you can see the MobileNet had a lot fewer parameters. It also ran for a lot fewer epochs, and the training accuracy was very high. It was 0.98, which is quite surprising given that the leaves are all so similar. CNN, by comparison, only gave me 0.9 after 300 epochs. The testing accuracy was also significantly better, 0.90 versus 0.84. So overall, MobileNet was superior in just about every way. The MobileNet model is also a layers of convolutional layers, sort of many layers deep. Here it is presented in a sort of a simple form for a color image minus black and white, so that cross 3 is different. It's similar to a ResNet or Inception in many ways, but it doesn't have the feedbacks, and it's also optimized for limited memory and slow processors. It can run without floating point calculations, so just using integer math, which is also very helpful. And it's supported by both TensorFlow Lite and the Apple Core ML product, so it's giving me a lot of flexibility going forward. To give you a better idea of how this worked out, here are two rows of two different predictions. You can see with 0.999 certainty it predicted the correct leaf. In the first case, the leaf was even rotated and angled, and so, but yet despite that it was able to predict it accurately. It was able to distinguish the second one from very similar images for other species with a very high degree of certainty. I decided to explore this question of certainty a little bit more carefully. I broke up my tests into two parts. One group where the prediction was actually correct, the top prediction was correct, and another group where the top prediction was wrong. And then I plotted what was the certainty of those predictions. And as expected, on the left histogram, the group where the prediction was right, the certainty was very high, 0.9 and above for that top prediction. But where the model predicted the wrong tree on the histogram on the right, well, the predictions were a little bit all over the map. The probabilities were smaller. You can see there's a couple of peaks, but certainly nothing very high. There were a few that were pretty high, but not too many. Now this was run over a sample of about 500 different tree leaves, which is not very high, and with an accuracy as high as this is, you can see there's not that many wrong predictions. And part of the reason for this sort of discrepancy is because some images are very distinctive and some of them are very confusing. Here we have, for example, a prediction of a tree that you can see that all four images are all very similar. So it's kind of hard for the system to identify the right one, especially if there's not enough resolution to see the veining pattern and all these different things. And these trees are generally distinguished based on their size and their bark and their shape and all these other factors that really the leaves don't have, are not enough, basically. So I'm very encouraged that I can create an app here to identify trees and basically present the user with the top one choice, or if it's not too certain, maybe the top 2 or 3 choices, and the user can distinguish. If we add into that also images of the trunk and other parts and other things, then the user should be able to very quickly identify the tree with incredible accuracy. This could be useful for education, for classes, for personal use as you're walking through the woods. Instead of taking a field guide, you have your phone with you, things like that. I'd also add that I did indeed try the TensorFlow Lite and was unable to actually convert my model. There's numerous bugs and it just didn't work. The different versions of TensorFlow that I was using were incompatible and we had all kinds of issues. I was, however, able to convert it to the Core ML library that Apple uses. They have a tool and it works flawlessly. So it's quite encouraging that this app might actually come to be. Now I just have to connect the camera and so forth, but I really did not have time to finish all of that before I had to submit this project, so hopefully I can get to that. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you get to try the mobile net.